So please, put your hands together for sweet Gwendolyn.
This performance is in memory of my cousin Chris, who was known as Smitty to his friends. He was my cool older cousin, a 70s and 80s era metalhead, original member of Kiss Army, roadie for Black Sabbath, personal assistant to Ronnie James Dio. He was nearly a pro golfer and loved the game and stuck with it for life. And he spent the last 29-ish years of his life working in the Hilton Head tourist industry. Chris was 14 years older than me, and we never knew each other as well as we might have since we grew up in different states, but we always stayed in touch. I remember being in his teenage bedroom at around 5 or 6 years old during a family visit, and him showing me his records and heavy metal posters in his bedroom while the adults were talking out in the living room. Black Sabbath was surely represented. I vaguely recall a significant revelation that a man could be named Alice and that rock and roll could involve horror props. But what I remember most vividly were all of his Kiss posters and memorabilia, which opened the door to a whole new world for me. Chris was an original member of the Kiss Army, with Kiss, I believe, being the first major band to brand their fan base that way. For anyone not familiar with Kiss, they were the first wave of glam rock theater metal, and they were most distinctive for their iconic face paint, with each member having created his own distinctive look. And the look that I am rocking tonight is that of Gene Simmons, possibly the most iconic of the batch. Kiss was the first time it was ever consciously impressed on my budding drag queen mind that not only could men wear makeup, but that there was a whole fun world of theater, costumes, music, and performing for rooms full of screaming fans out there. The seed had been planted. In 1987, Chris moved from North Carolina to Los Angeles with his best friend Lawrence, and ultimately wound up achieving the dream of a lifetime, becoming a roadie for legendary metal band Black Sabbath. While I was in middle school, he would tell me cool stories about life on the road, life in the recording studio, and behind-the-scenes stories with other bands they overlapped with. He hit peak cool older cousin status when, just weeks after my 17th birthday, he got 4 backstage passes for me to go with my mom and 2 friends to see Danzig opening up for Black Sabbath in Atlanta in 1992. I invited a friend who was about to go to the Berklee School of Rock, and because we felt remiss for not sharing our bounty with at least one total die-hard Sabbath fan, we invited his 14-year-old friend Sailor, who recently testified that the entire trajectory of his life was impacted by the trip, and who still plays in metal bands to this day, some 32 years later. Being far more into rock, and later punk, than I ever was into metal, the 3 of us were mostly along for the ride, the spectacle, and the thrill. We took it all in while Sailor explained to us what each song was with devoted teenage mega fan annotated detail, and living his best life rocking out as best he could as we sat in our assigned seats. After the show, we went backstage. I was very curious, with my only impression of what it was like backstage at a Civic Center show being Wayne's World, which had come out only a few months before. I think that the thing that stands out to me the most is how incredibly interested everyone in Black Sabbath was to actually meet us, because we were Chris's family. It was obvious how much they liked him and in what high regard they held him, and how they really just legitimately cared and were personally very curious to meet us. Literally the inverse of what you would expect your first time meeting top of their career rock stars. I would like to conclude this piece by tying it into tonight's theme. For all the things that I have rattled off that Chris was, I'd like to end on a contemplation of what he strikingly was not, because frankly, it is remarkable for someone who grew up as a straight white male in the 1960s and 70s in North Carolina to have not been a homophobe, transphobe, misogynist, or a bigot of any kind, and that I didn't have a moment's doubt ever of coming out to him. I can already hear Chris snorting in my mind and laughing, what a sorry state of affairs it would be that something like that would be considered remarkable, before sarcastically envisioning his epitaph, here lies Chris, at least he wasn't a bigot. And while he would be correct that it is sad that he was such an exception in that regard, it's all the more reason for me to pause to reflect on it. He grew up surrounded by messaging that other people didn't count as much as he did, and that he could get away with treating other people poorly if he wanted to. But he questioned that, even though he didn't have to. Interestingly, we touched on this on our last phone call, and what it came down to was that he had an anti-BS attitude. And he didn't like it when people targeted him and gave him BS. And he didn't like it when he saw other people targeting other people and giving them BS either. Pure and simple. He didn't miss a beat when I told him I was trans, nor did I ever worry that he would. And he didn't even miss a beat when I explained that I was a trans guy who is a drag queen, or that I wasn't taking testosterone for the purpose of transitioning, but just to feel more comfortable in the body that I'm in, largely as it is. When we spoke, he would offer congratulations on recent queer legal victories, or often condolences for the latest bad legislation. He followed my drag career with interest and offered his support and thanks for my activism, most especially including the protests after the murder of George Floyd, which he was too disabled to participate in himself, but which he was extremely personally happy to see and very hopeful that it would mark a change for the better. So rest in peace, Chris. Metalhead, rock and roller, avid golfer, dear, dear friend to many hundreds of people, and a very cool older cousin who, to include it in his epitaph, wasn't a misogynist or a bigot, no, at least about it, because he supported everyone's rights in a world where he didn't have to, and that will always be a noteworthy thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Big over to you. I'm sorry for the loss of your friend. Sweet Gwendolyn, how long had it been? There you are. How long had it been since you were on the show?